It was a quiet, uneventful evening in suburban Virginia. The kind of night where the world seemed to slow down just enough for people to catch their breath after a long day. FBI Director Jonathan Hayes had spent hours buried under stacks of reports and urgent memos at his office in Washington, D.C., trying to untangle yet another complex case involving national security. His mind was still buzzing with thoughts about the latest developments when he finally decided it was time to head home. Hayes climbed into his car, grateful for the silence that enveloped him as soon as he closed the door. He wasn't one for music or podcasts during drives. He preferred the quiet hum of the engine and the rhythmic sound of tires rolling over pavement. It gave him space to think, to process everything swirling around in his head. Tonight, though, he hoped to let go of work entirely. All he wanted was to unwind and maybe enjoy a cup of coffee once he got back to his cozy house on the outskirts of town. The roads were unusually empty, which suited Hayes just fine. Driving through the dimly lit streets felt almost meditative, like he was gliding through a calm river rather than navigating asphalt highways. The occasional flicker of headlights from passing cars barely registered in his consciousness. Everything appeared normal, until it didn't. As Hayes approached an intersection near the edge of town, something caught his attention in the rearview mirror. At first, he thought it might be his imagination playing tricks on him, but then, unmistakably blue and red lights began flashing behind him. His heart skipped a beat. Was he speeding? He couldn't recall checking the speedometer recently, but he hadn't been going particularly fast, or so he thought. With a deep sigh, Hayes signaled and pulled over onto the shoulder of the road. This was the last thing he needed after such a grueling day. As he brought the car to a stop, he glanced at the rearview mirror again. A police cruiser parked behind him, its lights casting eerie shadows across the dashboard. For a moment, Hayes considered reaching for his wallet to grab his ID, but he stopped himself. Protocol dictated that he wait until the officer approached. A few seconds later, the driver's side door of the cruiser opened, and a young officer stepped out. Even from a distance, Hayes could tell the officer looked tense. His hand hovered near the holster on his hip, and his posture radiated unease. Hayes frowned slightly. Something about this felt off. Most traffic stops he'd encountered in the past had been straightforward affairs, even polite exchanges. Yet here, there was an undeniable air of tension. When the officer reached the window, Hayes rolled it down halfway. "Good evening, officer," he said calmly, offering a small smile. "Is there a problem?" Instead of responding directly, the officer shone his flashlight into the car. The beam swept across Hayes's face before moving downward, illuminating the interior. That's when things took a turn. The officer's expression shifted from mild suspicion to outright alarm. His eyes widened as they landed on something resting innocently on the passenger seat, Hayes's service weapon. "Sir, is that a firearm?" The officer asked sharply, his voice laced with urgency. Hayes nodded, keeping his tone measured. "Yes, officer, it is. I'm authorized to carry it. Before he could finish explaining, the officer interrupted him. "Step out of the vehicle, sir. Now." Hayes blinked, momentarily stunned. He hadn't expected this reaction. Surely showing his credentials would clear up any misunderstanding. With deliberate movements, he reached toward the glove compartment, where he kept his badge and identification. But the officer misinterpreted the gesture. "Don't move," the officer barked, taking a step back while simultaneously drawing his own weapon. "Keep your hands where I can see them." For a split second, Hayes froze. Here he was, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, being treated like a common criminal. It was surreal, almost laughable if it weren't so serious. He raised his hands slowly, palms facing outward, to show he meant no harm. "Officer, please listen. I'm Jonathan Hayes, the FBI director. Let me explain." But the words seemed to have little effect. If anything, the officer grew more agitated. "Stay right there. Don't make any sudden moves," he shouted, his voice cracking slightly with nerves. Hayes's mind raced. What had started as a routine traffic stop had spiraled into something far more complicated and potentially dangerous. He realized now that the officer likely hadn't recognized him. To someone unfamiliar with his face or title, he probably looked like any other driver who happened to have a gun in plain sight. And in today's climate, that alone could trigger panic. Despite the absurdity of the situation, Hayes forced himself to remain composed. He knew better than to argue or resist. Doing so would only escalate matters further. Instead, he focused on calming the officer, speaking slowly and clearly. "I understand you're following protocol, officer, and I respect that. But I assure you, I am who I say I am. My identification is in the glove compartment. Would you like me to retrieve it?" The officer hesitated, his grip tightening on his weapon. For a moment it seemed like he might relent. Then, shaking his head, he replied, "No, sir, just stay put. We'll sort this out." Minutes ticked by, agonizingly slowly. Each second stretched longer than the last as Hayes stood beside his car, hands raised, feeling both humiliated and bewildered. Cars passed by occasionally, their drivers craning their necks to catch a glimpse of what was happening. Some slowed down, curious about the spectacle unfolding on the side of the road. Others sped up, eager to avoid getting entangled in whatever drama was playing out. Throughout it all, Hayes maintained his composure, though inside frustration simmered. How had this happened? Of all the nights, of all the officers, why did this particular encounter spiral so far out of control? He tried reasoning again, offering to call his deputy director or provide additional verification, but the officer remained unmoved. Every attempt to defuse the situation only seemed to heighten the tension. And so there Hayes stood, a man entrusted with safeguarding the nation's security, under the harsh glare of flashing lights, wondering how much longer this bizarre ordeal would last. The night air was cool, but Jonathan Hayes could feel beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Standing beside his car with his hands raised, he tried to keep his breathing steady despite the surreal and unsettling situation unfolding before him. The young officer stood a few feet away, his gun still trained on Hayes, his face pale and tense. It was clear the officer was struggling to maintain control, his grip on the weapon tightening as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. Hayes's mind raced. He knew that staying calm was crucial. Losing his temper or making any sudden movements could easily escalate the situation. But the absurdity of it all gnawed at him. Here he was, the director of one of the most powerful law enforcement agencies in the world, being treated like a dangerous suspect. If this moment weren't so serious, he might have found it almost comical. Yet there was nothing funny about standing under the harsh glare of headlights with a loaded firearm pointed directly at him. "Officer," Hayes began again, his voice firm but measured. "I understand you're doing your job, and I respect that. But please let me explain who I am. You can verify my identity through dispatch if you need to." The officer hesitated for a split second, his eyes darting between Hayes's face and the passenger seat where the gun lay. For a brief moment, it seemed like he might lower his weapon. But then, his expression hardened again and he shook his head. "Stay right there. Don't move," he snapped, his tone sharp and unyielding. Hayes felt a pang of frustration but pushed it aside. He reminded himself that the officer was likely scared, unsure of what to do next. After all, finding a firearm in someone's car wasn't something officers encountered every day. Add to that the fact that Hayes hadn't immediately identified himself properly. It was no wonder the young man was on edge. Still, it didn't change the reality of how wrong this entire situation felt. Minutes dragged on, each one stretching longer than the last. Hayes's arms were starting to ache from holding them up, but he dared not lower them. Instead, he focused on speaking calmly, trying to reassure the officer while also subtly reminding him of protocol. "Officer, I'm more than happy to cooperate fully. All I ask is that you confirm my identity. Once you do, you'll see that I pose no threat. My name is Jonathan Hayes. I'm the director of the FBI." For a fleeting moment, Hayes thought. He saw recognition flicker in the officer's eyes. Surely even a rookie cop would know what those initials meant. But instead of softening, the officer's stance grew even stiffer. "Sir, I don't care who you say you are. Right now, you're just another driver who has a weapon in their car. Until I get confirmation, I have to treat this as a potential threat." The words stung, though Hayes tried not to show it. He had spent decades building a career based on trust, integrity, and leadership. Now here he was, reduced to pleading his case like anyone else caught in a traffic stop gone awry. It was humbling and infuriating, but he forced himself to swallow his pride. Arguing wouldn't help. Patience and cooperation were his best options. As the standoff continued, Hayes noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. Another patrol car had pulled up behind the first one, its lights flashing silently. A second officer stepped out, this one older and more experienced by the looks of her uniform and demeanor. She approached cautiously, her hand resting lightly on her holster but not drawing her weapon. Her presence alone seemed to bring some semblance of calm to the chaotic scene. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice commanding yet steady. The young officer turned toward her, relief washing over his features. "Ma'am, I stopped this vehicle for speeding. When I approached, I saw a firearm on the passenger seat. The driver claims he's the FBI director, but I haven't been able to verify it yet." The female officer nodded slowly, her gaze shifting to Hayes. As she studied him, her expression changed. Recognition dawned on her face, and she took a step closer. "Director Hayes?" she said, her tone softer now. "Is that really you?" Hayes nodded, lowering his hand slightly. "Yes, ma'am. That's correct. I apologize for the confusion. I should have clarified my identity sooner, but I assure you I am who I say I am." The officer relaxed visibly, though she kept a professional distance. Turning to her colleague, she said, "Stand down, officer. This is Director Hayes. I've met him before. He's legitimate." The young officer blinked, his face flushing red with embarrassment. He lowered his weapon reluctantly, muttering an apology under his breath. "Sir, I didn't realize. I'm sorry." Hayes exhaled deeply, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease ever so slightly. Though the immediate danger had passed, the weight of what had just happened lingered heavily in the air. He offered the officer a small, tight-lipped smile. "It's okay. These things happen. Let's just make sure we handle this properly moving forward." The female officer stepped forward, taking charge of the situation. She introduced herself as Detective Laura Martinez and explained that she would assist in resolving the matter. After confirming Hayes's identity through dispatch, she apologized on behalf of the department for the misunderstanding. "Director, I can't imagine what this must have been like for you. Please accept our sincerest apologies." Hayes appreciated her professionalism, but couldn't shake the lingering unease. While he understood that mistakes could happen, the fact remained that he had been held at gunpoint for no valid reason. The gravity of the situation wasn't lost on him, nor would it be forgotten anytime soon. Before leaving the scene, Hayes requested the names and badge numbers of both officers involved. He assured them that he intended to file a formal report, not out of malice, but to ensure accountability and prevent similar incidents in the future. Both officers agreed, though the younger one looked visibly shaken, realizing the potential consequences of his actions. As Hayes climbed back into his car and drove away, he couldn't help but reflect on the bizarre turn of events. What had started as a routine evening had spiraled into something far more complicated and potentially damaging. The image of the officer's trembling hand gripping his weapon stayed etched in Hayes's mind, a stark reminder of how quickly trust could erode when fear took hold. Despite everything, Hayes resolved to approach the aftermath with fairness and objectivity. He knew that punishing the officer outright wouldn't solve the root problem. What was needed was a deeper examination of training protocols and procedures to ensure that such misunderstandings didn't happen again. And perhaps, just maybe, this incident could serve as a catalyst for meaningful change within the system. But as he drove home, the quiet hum of the engine offering little comfort, Hayes couldn't ignore the nagging question in the back of his mind. How many others had been placed in similar situations, and what had become of them? The arrival of Detective Laura Martinez had shifted the tone of the encounter dramatically. Her calm and composed demeanor acted as a balm to the tension that had been building between Jonathan Hayes and the young officer. While the rookie cop still looked visibly shaken, his senior colleague wasted no time taking control of the situation. She approached Hayes with a mixture of professionalism and genuine concern, her voice steady but kind. "Director Hayes," she began, addressing him directly, "I apologize for this misunderstanding. I recognize you from a briefing we attended last year. Please allow me to verify your credentials so we can resolve this quickly." Hayes nodded, grateful for her intervention. He appreciated the respect she showed him, even in such an awkward and uncomfortable scenario. "Thank you, Detective Martinez. I understand mistakes can happen, but I hope we can ensure something like this doesn't occur again." Detective Martinez gave a small nod before turning to the younger officer. "Officer Daniels," she said firmly, using his name to grab his attention, "lower your weapon and step back. This is Director Hayes of the FBI. You need to confirm someone's identity before escalating to this level." Officer Daniels hesitated for a moment, his face flushed with embarrassment. His hands trembled slightly as he holstered his gun, clearly aware of the gravity of what had just transpired. "Yes, ma'am," he mumbled, stepping back a few paces. His eyes darted between Hayes and Martinez, unsure of what to do next. Martinez took charge immediately, instructing Daniels to contact dispatch and verify Hayes' identity officially. While waiting for confirmation, she engaged Hayes in polite conversation, asking if he was all right and whether he needed anything after the ordeal. Though Hayes assured her he was fine, he couldn't hide the lingering frustration in his voice. "I've been in law enforcement for decades," he said, choosing his words carefully. "And while I understand that officers are trained to prioritize safety, tonight felt excessive. There's a difference between caution and overreaction. That line needs to be clearer." Detective Martinez listened intently, nodding along. "You're absolutely right, sir. And rest assured, this will be addressed thoroughly. Officer Daniels is relatively new to the force, but that's not an excuse for poor judgment. We'll make sure proper measures are taken to prevent this from happening again." When dispatch confirmed Hayes' identity, there was an audible release of tension among everyone present. Detective Martinez turned to Hayes once more, offering another sincere apology. "Director, on behalf of the department, I deeply regret this incident. It shouldn't have happened, and we'll take full responsibility for it." Hayes accepted her apology graciously, though he made it clear that accountability was necessary. "I appreciate your willingness to address this, Detective, but actions speak louder than words. I intend to file a formal report about what occurred here tonight. It's important not just for me, but for maintaining public trust in law enforcement." Martinez didn't argue or try to dissuade him. Instead, she agreed wholeheartedly. "Of course, Director. Transparency is key. If you'd like, I can assist you in filing the report now, or you can handle it through your own channels. Either way, we'll cooperate fully." With that settled, Hayes prepared to leave the scene. Before getting into his car, however, he requested the names and badge numbers of both officers involved. Detective Martinez provided them without hesitation, emphasizing that internal investigations would follow. She also assured Hayes that Officer Daniels would face disciplinary action for his conduct during the stop. As Hayes drove away, he replayed the events in his mind. The presence of Detective Martinez had undoubtedly prevented the situation from spiraling further out of control. Her quick thinking and professionalism stood in stark contrast to Daniels' panicked response. Yet despite her competence, Hayes couldn't ignore the broader implications of what had happened. The aftermath begins. The following morning, news of the incident spread rapidly within law enforcement circles. Word traveled fast when high-profile individuals were involved, and by midday, nearly everyone in the department knew about the traffic stop gone wrong. Officers whispered about it in hallways, some defending Daniels' actions while others criticized his lack of composure. Meanwhile, higher-ups scrambled to contain the fallout, knowing that public perception could shift dramatically depending on how they handled the situation. For Detective Martinez, the aftermath meant fielding questions from superiors and colleagues alike. She recounted the details of the night, careful to remain objective and factual. When asked about her thoughts on Daniel's behavior, she didn't mince words. He acted out of fear rather than training, she admitted. But fear isn't an excuse. Officers are expected to maintain professionalism under pressure, especially when dealing with potentially sensitive situations. Her candor earned her both praise and criticism. Some admired her honesty, viewing it as a sign of integrity. Others saw it as throwing Daniels under the bus, despite her insistence that accountability was essential. Regardless, Martinez remained, steadfast in her belief that lessons needed to be learned, not just by Daniels but by the entire department. Daniels, on the other hand, found himself at the center of a storm. The weight of his actions pressed heavily on him, and he struggled to come to terms with the consequences. Colleagues who had initially sympathized with him began distancing themselves, wary of being associated with the controversy. Even his family noticed the change in him. He became withdrawn, barely eating or sleeping as guilt consumed him. His commanding officer called him into a private meeting early the next day. Sitting across from him in a sparsely furnished office, the captain delivered a stern lecture. "Son, you messed up big time," he said bluntly. "You let your nerves get the better of you, and because of that you put yourself and an innocent man in harm's way. Do you understand the seriousness of this?" Daniels nodded, his head bowed in shame. "Yes, sir, I know I screwed up. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I wasn't thinking clearly." "That's exactly the problem," the captain replied. "Law enforcement is about more than reacting instinctively. It's about making smart decisions, even when the stakes feel high. What you did last night wasn't just reckless, it was dangerous, and unfortunately that means there will be consequences." Daniels braced himself for what came next. He already knew he wouldn't escape unscathed, but hearing it confirmed aloud was still difficult. The captain outlined the steps that would follow: a formal investigation, mandatory retraining, and likely suspension pending review. Depending on the outcome, criminal charges might also be considered, given the severity of holding a firearm on a federal official without cause. As Daniels left the office, his future suddenly uncertain, Hayes was preparing to address the issue publicly. Knowing that silence could breed misinformation, he decided to hold a press conference to discuss the incident openly. True to his character, he approached the topic with grace and diplomacy, emphasizing the importance of mutual respect between civilians and law enforcement. "We all play critical roles in ensuring the safety and well-being of our communities," Hayes told reporters gathered in the conference room. "But trust is built when we act with integrity and professionalism." Last night's events highlight the need for better communication and training. Mistakes happen, but it's how we respond to them that defines us. His measured tone and focus on solutions rather than blame resonated with many. Some praised him for handling the situation with dignity, while others questioned why he hadn't pressed harsher penalties against Daniels. Hayes acknowledged these concerns but reiterated his belief in reform over retribution. "Punishing one individual won't fix systemic issues," he explained. "What we need is comprehensive change. Better protocols, improved training, and a commitment to accountability." Back at the police station, Daniels sat alone in the locker room, staring at his reflection in the mirror. For the first time in his career, he doubted whether he belonged in law enforcement. The weight of Hayes's words echoed in his mind. Trust is built when we act with integrity. Could he rebuild that trust? Or had he already lost it forever? Only time would tell. The days following the incident were filled with tension and uncertainty, not just for Officer Daniels but for the entire police department. News of the traffic stop involving FBI Director Jonathan Hayes had spread beyond law enforcement circles and into the public domain. Social media exploded with opinions, memes, and heated debates about accountability, authority, and the responsibilities of those sworn to protect. The story dominated headlines, turning what should have been a private matter into a national conversation. For Officer Daniels, life became a whirlwind of internal investigations, formal hearings, and whispered judgments from colleagues. Every day felt like walking on eggshells. He arrived at work each morning dreading the stares and side comments from other officers. Some avoided him altogether, while others offered half-hearted words of encouragement that only made him feel worse. Despite his best efforts to stay focused, on his duties he couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was watching him, waiting for him to slip up again. Meanwhile, Detective Laura Martinez found herself caught in the middle of the storm. As the senior officer who had intervened during the traffic stop, she was hailed by some as a hero for preventing the situation from escalating further. Others accused her of being too lenient, arguing that she should have taken immediate action against Daniels instead of allowing the investigation to play out. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from reporters, colleagues, and even strangers wanting to weigh in on the case. It was exhausting, but Martinez refused to let the pressure get to her. She believed firmly in due process and knew that rushing to judgment wouldn't solve anything. The investigation unfolds. The internal investigation moved quickly, given the high-profile nature of the case. A panel of senior officers reviewed body camera footage, witness statements, and radio logs to piece together exactly what had happened that night. What they uncovered painted a complicated picture. On one hand, Daniels had clearly overreacted, drawing his weapon prematurely and failing to follow proper protocol for verifying Hayes' identity. On the other hand, it was evident that he had been acting out of fear rather than malice, a common issue among rookie officers still finding their footing in high-pressure situations. During his testimony, Daniels admitted to feeling overwhelmed during the stop. "I saw the gun on the passenger seat and my training kicked in, or at least I thought it did," he explained. "All I could think about was keeping myself safe. I didn't mean to escalate things the way I did. I just panicked." His honesty earned him some sympathy from the panel, but it wasn't enough to excuse his actions. They concluded that while Daniels hadn't intended to harm anyone, his decision to hold Hayes at gunpoint without sufficient cause constituted misconduct. Furthermore, his failure to properly identify Hayes before escalating the situation demonstrated a concerning lack of judgment. Hayes himself submitted a written statement detailing his perspective on the events. He described how the stop had unfolded, emphasizing the moments when Daniels ignored his attempts to explain who he was. While Hayes acknowledged that mistakes could happen, he stressed the importance of accountability. "This isn't about punishing Officer Daniels personally," he wrote. "It's about ensuring that similar incidents don't occur in the future. Public trust is fragile, and we must do everything in our power to preserve it." Public reaction and media. Frenzy as the investigation progressed, public opinion remained divided. Many people sympathized with Daniels, pointing out that he was young and inexperienced. "He was just doing his job," one commenter wrote online. "Anyone would be scared if they found a gun in someone's car. Give the guy a break." Others were less forgiving, criticizing Daniels for letting fear override professionalism. "If you can't handle the stress of being a police officer, maybe this isn't the career for you," another post read. The media played a significant role in shaping the narrative, often amplifying extremes on both sides. Talk shows debated whether Daniels deserved leniency or harsh punishment, while news outlets published editorials calling for sweeping reforms in police training programs. Some journalists highlighted the broader implications of the incident, framing it as an example of systemic issues within law enforcement. Others focused solely on the human element, portraying Daniels as a well-meaning but flawed individual thrust into an impossible situation. Amidst the chaos, Hayes maintained a measured stance. In interviews, he reiterated his belief in accountability and reform, steering clear of personal attacks against Daniels. His calm demeanor won praise from many quarters, though critics argued that he wasn't pushing hard enough for justice. "Why doesn't he demand stricter penalties?" one article asked. "Isn't that what real leadership looks like?" Despite the criticism, Hayes stood firm. He understood that change took time, and that vilifying Daniels wouldn't address the root causes of the problem. Instead, he focused on advocating for improvements in training protocols, particularly in scenarios involving high-profile individuals. "We need to prepare officers for situations like this," he told reporters. "They should know how to balance caution with respect, even when they're under pressure." The verdict and its aftermath. After weeks of deliberation, the disciplinary panel announced its decision. Officer Daniels would face suspension without pay for 3 months, followed by mandatory retraining in de-escalation techniques and firearms handling. Additionally, he would be placed on probation for 6 months upon returning to active duty. If he violated any policies during that period, he risked termination. While some viewed the punishment as fair, others saw it as either too lenient or excessively harsh. Supporters of Daniels argued that suspending him for such a long period would ruin his career, while critics claimed he should have faced criminal charges for pointing a weapon at a federal official. For Daniels himself, the verdict brought a mix of relief and dread. On one hand, he was grateful not to lose his job entirely. On the other, the road ahead seemed daunting, filled with challenges he wasn't sure he could overcome. Detective Martinez continued to support Daniels throughout the ordeal, offering guidance and reassurance whenever she could. "You made a mistake, but you're not defined by it," she told him during one of their conversations. "Use this as an opportunity to grow. Show everyone, including yourself, that you're capable of learning from this experience." Daniels nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. He spent countless hours reflecting on the incident, replaying every moment in his mind. He realized now how much damage a single lapse in judgment could cause, not just to those directly involved, but to the community as a whole. Determined to make amends, he threw himself into the retraining program, vowing to emerge stronger and wiser. Lessons learned. As the dust began to settle, the incident sparked widespread discussions about police reform. Law enforcement agencies across the country took note, implementing new measures to prevent similar misunderstandings in the future. Training programs were updated to include modules on identifying government officials, handling high-stakes encounters, and managing stress in the field. Community outreach initiatives also gained momentum, aiming to rebuild trust between officers and the people they served. For Hayes, the ordeal reinforced his belief in the importance of transparency and accountability. Though he had initially been frustrated and humiliated, he came to see the incident as a catalyst for positive change. By addressing the issue head-on and advocating for reform, he hoped to ensure that no one else, whether a high-ranking official or an ordinary citizen, would ever have to endure a similar experience. And as for Daniels, the journey toward redemption was just beginning. While the scars of that night would never fully heal, he resolved to channel his guilt into growth. Each day presented a new chance to prove that he was more than the sum of his mistakes, and that perhaps trust could be rebuilt one step at a time. The months that followed the incident were transformative, not just for Officer Daniels but for the entire law enforcement community. The ripple effects of that fateful night stretched far beyond the individuals involved, sparking conversations and reforms that would leave a lasting impact on policing practices nationwide. What had started as a simple traffic stop turned into a pivotal moment, forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, accountability, and the delicate balance between authority and responsibility. A new beginning for Officer Daniels. For Officer Daniels, life after the disciplinary hearing was anything but easy. Suspended from duty for 3 months, he spent his days grappling with guilt and self-doubt. At first, he avoided social gatherings, too ashamed to face friends or family. Even trips to the grocery store felt like walking through a gauntlet of judgmental stares. But slowly, with encouragement from Detective Martinez and others who believed in him, he began to rebuild his confidence. Daniels threw himself into the retraining program, determined to turn this low point into an opportunity for growth. The curriculum focused heavily on de-escalation techniques, stress management, and proper identification procedures, all areas where Daniels had faltered during the traffic stop. Each session challenged him to think critically about his actions and consider alternative approaches to high-pressure situations. One particularly impactful exercise involved role-playing scenarios with experienced officers. In one simulation, Daniels played the part of a rookie responding to a suspicious vehicle late at night. As he approached the car, he noticed a firearm on the passenger seat, a deliberate nod to the real-life incident. This time, however, he took a deep breath, remembered his training, and calmly asked the driver to confirm their identity before taking any further action. When the instructor praised his composure, Daniels felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he could do better next time. Beyond the technical skills, the program emphasized empathy and communication. Officers were taught to listen actively, assess body language, and build rapport with civilians, even in tense situations. For Daniels, this aspect of the training hit home. He realized now that his initial failure hadn't been just about protocol. It had been about failing to connect with Hayes as a human being. That realization weighed heavily on him, but it also motivated him to change. By the time Daniels returned to active duty, he was a different officer. His colleagues noticed the shift immediately. His demeanor was calmer, his decisions more deliberate. Though some still treated him with caution, many welcomed him back warmly, impressed by the effort he'd put into improving himself. "I'm not the same guy I was 6 months ago," he told Martinez during a quiet moment at the station. "I messed up, but I'm learning from it, and I won't let anyone down again." Broader reforms in law enforcement. While Daniels worked to rebuild his career, the incident prompted sweeping changes across law enforcement agencies nationwide. Hayes's public advocacy for reform played a key role in driving these efforts forward. In speeches, interviews, and policy meetings, he consistently highlighted the need for improved training and greater accountability. "This isn't about pointing fingers," he often said. "It's about creating systems that prevent mistakes from happening in the first place." Agencies responded by implementing new protocols designed to minimize misunderstandings during traffic stops and other encounters. One major initiative involved equipping officers with mobile apps that allowed them to quickly verify the identities of government officials, military personnel, and others carrying firearms legally. These tools streamlined the process, reducing the likelihood of errors like the one Daniels had made. Training programs also underwent significant updates. Scenarios involving high-profile individuals became standard components of police academies, teaching recruits how to handle such cases with professionalism and respect. Instructors stressed the importance of verifying credentials before escalating situations, reinforcing the idea that assumptions could lead to dangerous outcomes. Community engagement initiatives gained momentum as well. Police departments organized town hall meetings, inviting citizens to voice their concerns and share feedback. These forums fostered open dialogue, helping bridge the gap between law enforcement and the communities they served. Officers participated in workshops on cultural sensitivity and implicit bias, learning to recognize and address prejudices that might influence their behavior in the field. Perhaps most importantly, there was a renewed focus on mental health support for officers. Recognizing the toll that stress and trauma can take, departments invested in counseling services and peer support networks. The goal was to create environments where officers felt comfortable seeking help when needed, rather than bottling up emotions until they boiled over. Public perception and healing. As reforms took shape, public perception of the incident evolved. Initially, opinions had been sharply divided, with some condemning Daniels outright and others defending him as a victim of circumstance. Over time, however, the narrative shifted toward a more nuanced understanding of what had happened and why it mattered. Hayes's steady leadership played a crucial role in shaping this shift. By refusing to vilify Daniels and instead focusing on systemic issues, he set a tone of constructive reflection. His willingness to engage openly with critics and supporters alike earned widespread admiration, even from those who initially questioned his approach. "It takes courage to forgive," one editorial noted, "but it takes wisdom to channel that forgiveness into meaningful change." For Daniels, regaining public trust proved to be a gradual process. Early interactions with civilians were awkward, marked by lingering skepticism and occasional hostility. Yet, as he demonstrated consistent professionalism and compassion, attitudes began to soften. A turning point came during a routine traffic stop, where a nervous driver accidentally dropped her wallet while searching for her license. Instead of reacting harshly, Daniels knelt down to help her retrieve it, offering reassurance along the way. The woman later wrote a letter to the department praising his kindness, a small gesture that meant the world to Daniels. Even within the police, forced perceptions began to shift. Daniels's dedication to improvement inspired his peers, many of whom started viewing him as a symbol of resilience and accountability. He could have walked away after everything that happened, one colleague remarked. Instead, he chose to fight for a second chance, and he's making the most of it. Later reflections and moving forward. Looking back on the incident, Hayes reflected on how much had changed, not just externally, but internally as well. While the experience had been humbling and frustrating, it had also reinforced his belief in the power of integrity and transparency. Leadership is about setting an example, he said during a speech commemorating the anniversary of the event. If we want our communities to trust us, we have to show them that we're willing to hold ourselves accountable, even when it's hard. For Daniels, the journey was far from over, but he no longer feared the road ahead. Every day brought new opportunities to prove himself, not just as an officer, but as a person committed to doing right by others. He carried the lessons of that night with him always, using them as reminders of how fragile trust could be and how precious it was once earned. As for the broader implications, the incident served as a wake-up call for law enforcement agencies everywhere. It underscored the importance of adaptability, humility, and continuous improvement. Mistakes would inevitably happen, but it was how they were addressed that truly mattered. By embracing accountability and prioritizing reform, the system could become stronger, fairer, and more just for everyone. In the end, what stood out most was the resilience of all those involved. From Hayes' steadfast commitment to progress to Daniel's determination to rebuild his life, the story was ultimately one of redemption and renewal. It reminded people that even in moments of conflict and misunderstanding, there was always room for growth and hope.